Hey there, friends. Today we are going to start with a little game. My game is called Sink or Float. I have a big tub of water here and I have a bunch of little objects, and I want you to guess whether each object will sink or float. Are you ready? Let's start with a spoon. This is a metal spoon. Do you think that this spoon will sink or float? Let's see. Sunk right to the bottom. All right, how about a pine cone? This is a pine cone from my backyard. Do you think this pine cone will sink or float? It floats. Were you right? All right, let's try another one. Ooh, this is a pretty painted rock. Not sure if my daughter painted this or if we found it. What do you think? Sink or float? That was an easy one. Rocks sink, right? They sink like a rock. All right, how about some toys? How about a Lego? Do you think that this Lego will sink or float? Floats. And how about a Lincoln log? Do you ever build with Lincoln logs? It's fun to build Lincoln log houses and cabins. But what do you think? Sink or float? Another floater. All right, how about a Hot Wheels car? Sink or float? Oh, that one sunk right to the bottom. We don't want to be driving that car over the bridge, right? So we know what these objects float or sink. But what about people? Do people sink or float? Well, if you know how to swim, you probably know how to float, either on your back or on your stomach, or maybe even your side, right? But if you don't know how to swim and someone throws you in the deep end, you're probably gonna sink to the bottom, right? And whether you know how to swim or not, I'm betting that you cannot float on your feet standing up, right? You might be able to maybe stand on a surfboard, although even that's questionable for some people. I've seen people try to jump into pools on top of rafts and floaties and try to stay standing. They never stay standing for long, even with a floaty underneath them. But somebody in today's story did float on their feet. In fact, he walked on water. Think you know who that is? Well, our story picks up right where last week left off. Remember, Jesus has just fed 5,000 people with one little boy's tiny little lunch, right? And they were all full. Nobody was hungry. They didn't have to ration it out and make sure that everybody just got just enough. No, everybody got more than enough. They were so full and there were leftovers. Well, after that meal, Jesus sent his disciples out in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. He decided not to go with them. Maybe he wanted some alone time. Maybe he was gonna pick up after all the 5,000 people there. But for whatever reason, he sent them on ahead without him. And when they were about 4 miles out, now that's a pretty long way, too far, they probably, were so far out they couldn't turn back to shore. A big wind picked up and a storm came in. Does that sound familiar? Remember, they had another storm out on the Sea of Galilee, but thankfully Jesus was with them, and when they woke him up, all he had to do was speak and the storm disappeared. He said, "Be still," and the waves and the wind stopped, remember? Well, this time Jesus isn't with them. So what are they gonna do? I bet they were really, really scared, but not as scared as they were when they looked out and they saw something coming towards them on top of the water. Well, they were terrified because they thought maybe it's a ghost. I mean, how would you feel? What would you think if you were out in the middle of nowhere on a lake and saw something coming towards you on top of the water and you could tell it wasn't a boat? That would be pretty freaky, right? Well, they were terrified, but then they looked closer and they realized that it was Jesus coming towards them. He was walking on top of the water, not walking in the water up to his waist or anything. He was walking right on top of the water as if he was floating on his feet. Well, they were still a little bit afraid because how can anybody do that, right? But Jesus said, "Don't be afraid, take courage, I am here." And he got in the boat, and immediately the waves and the wind stopped again. No more storm. And they got to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and they got onto the shore, and wouldn't you know it, people there had heard about Jesus too. And as usual, crowds surrounded him, and people from all over the place brought to Jesus their sick and their people who needed healing, and everyone who even just touched his robes were healed. Friends, do you ever feel like you're in a situation where God is really far away, too far away to be helpful? Or do you ever feel like you're all alone? Do you ever feel like your problems are so big that even God can't help? Well, it's not true. Jesus is always right there with you, even when it seems like he's far away, even when it seems like he's 4 miles across the sea and out on shore. He is right there with you, ready to save you, ready to help you. All you have to do is ask, and he will heal everybody who touches even his cloak if they have faith. I'll see you next week, friends, when we get to Mark chapter 7.